really pleased to be able to do this conference again this year in partnership with the Atlantic Council. This has been a fantastic partnership. And I really feel like the test of a good conference is whether the organizers learn a lot from the sessions, right? If they do, then it's an interesting, useful experience. If they don't, it's just an exercise in advocacy or promoting in-house products. So this, from our conversations yesterday, the sessions yesterday, I thought they were very interesting, and I learned a lot about sectors within Pakistan and trends and developments that I hadn't known about and hadn't been following deeply. So I consider that to be the mark of a great partnership, and I'm glad to be here and to be able to work with Husain, whom everyone describes as being energetic, and that is in fact the right word to describe what this partnership has been like. I'm very pleased this morning to be able to kick us off with a conversation with Amir Husain, who's joining us from Texas. His bio is really quite extraordinary. He describes himself as a serial entrepreneur, which is, if you look at his bio, just again and again and again, he's pushed into new areas, into new fields. He is on the board of advisors of the University of Texas at Austin, Department of Computer Science, and on the NATO Maritime Unmanned Systems Innovation Advisory Board. I bet that has a long acronym that I'm not going to attempt, as a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And he, about a decade ago, he incorporated SparkCognition, an AI company, where he served as founder and CEO. And as we'll discuss, this is a company that has some really incredible partnerships with Fortune 100 companies and others around the world. About 5 years ago, he became the founding CEO of SkyGrid, which is another thing I want to talk to him about, a venture that's building an aerial operating system for the future. And he's also done work in the defense space with SparkCognition Government Systems, chaired by former Deputy Secretary of Defense Bob Work. He's been awarded over 24 patents, and has a number of books. I would really commend to you this book from a few years ago, The Sentient Machine, and more recently, a really wonderful, pithy book called Generative AI for Leaders. So he is an author, an innovator, a business leader, and just really delighted that he would make time to be with us today. So welcome.
Well, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, and thank you all for being here. It's a real pleasure to be with you.
I wanted to begin, maybe ask you to give a précis of your career, and in particular some of the pathway of some of the technologies you've worked on that have been most interesting and exciting for you, and then also want to push hear more about a few of those, and then
Sure.
We will at some point pivot to Pakistan and sort of the intersection of these technologies with
Sure.
With the developing world.
Yeah, I'll start early, but I'll try and make the story quick. I've been in love with computers and software and technology since the age of 4. I chanced upon a Commodore 64 that I still remember clear as day, running Hangman, and that was the first time when I realized that this TV screen, which was essentially passive in the sense that you couldn't control it. Whatever was coming from the other end was coming, and you had no control over it. And now suddenly with this device, with this computer connected to the TV, all of it became fungible, all of it became changeable. And this idea of gaining control over a system of that type immediately sparked in my mind, well, what could I do with this? I could build worlds, I could do anything I wanted to with the combination of this. So sometimes that spark goes off in your mind, you develop a hypothesis, and that hypothesis drives you for the rest of your life. And that really is my story in a nutshell. I was born in Lahore. I grew up there, went to HSN College, and then dropped out when I was in the 8th grade to take my O-levels and A-levels privately. I completed my bachelor's when I was 15, joined my bachelor's when I was 15, completed it when I was 17, and came to the United States to pursue a graduate degree at the University of Texas at Austin. Dropped out of the PhD program and launched my first venture-funded startup. Sold that, did another one, sold that, and then fast forward in 2013, I started SparkCognition. The reason for starting SparkCognition was because, in my view at that time, first of all, artificial intelligence wasn't really being talked about broadly. But secondly, where it was being used, it was being used in very narrow ways, which to me at least were somewhat myopic, even though they had business merit, but they were myopic. So for example, being able to recommend somebody the next movie to play on Netflix, or create an ad that people would click on more. Interesting, but not to me. So what I wanted to do was apply artificial intelligence in the real world. And as I started looking at the problem of infrastructure, one thing struck me, which is that infrastructure really makes the world go round. If you think about human progress, if you think about the quality of life all over the world, if you think about opportunities, oftentimes all of this boils down to the availability of infrastructure. Do you have electricity? Do you have clean water? Do you have reliable communications? Do you have inexpensive computational capacity on which to build your ideas? And so on and so forth, not to mention logistics and many other elements. So there was $100 trillion worth of infrastructure in the world. And my view was, what if we wrapped this infrastructure with smart software that would make this infrastructure function better? Because at the same time, we have the climate challenge. So we can't rip and replace this infrastructure, but we've got to reduce the CO2 emissions that come out of $100 trillion worth of stuff. We can't rip and replace it. So how do we solve that problem? By optimizing it with software. There's now issues of cyber threat to this infrastructure. How do we mitigate those for systems that were built in the 70s and 80s? You can do that with artificial intelligence. So this notion of being able to get more in a cleaner way, in a safer way, from hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of infrastructure became the driving sort of idea behind SparkCognition. And initially, we started talking to very large companies that operated grids and produced electricity. And many of them laughed me out of the room because their premise was, listen, how is this AI going to outdo the performance or the insight of a vibration analyst that has 40 years of experience in finding problems with our gear? How can this possibly do that? You're not even a vibration analyst, and you claim that you wrote this. So there was a complete disconnect between the ability for the software to do things intelligently and the knowledge needing to pre-exist and simply being encoded by a human as a transfer of 100% of the knowledge required into the body of software. There was this gap, which was, hey, the software can also learn. I might not be a grandmaster, but the program I've written to play chess can beat a grandmaster. So there's a delta between my knowledge of chess and the outcome. Where do you think that's coming from? If programs can't think, where do you think that's coming from? And in a similar vein, we realized that very quickly we could convince these large companies. Now, when you start a company like this with a guy and a PowerPoint and a little bit of code, and your goal is that you want to impact $100 trillion worth of infrastructure, the right way to go about it is not to try and find each one of these people individually, but to work with partners. So very succinctly, on the defense side, on the aviation side, we worked with great partners like Boeing and brought in many investors, Temasek of Singapore and March Capital and State Street Bank and Verizon and the Hearst Company, and just a tremendous list of partners globally that have helped us get access to that infrastructure. And today, we have a very, very broad list of clients, and we are applying AI in exactly the way that we envisaged 10, 12 years ago. I say all of this to give you a sense of the conception of AI. Today, if you use ChatGPT, your conception might be, AI is a really smart chatbot. Or if you use DALL-E, you might say, AI is a way to generate really cool pictures. Or if you're a back-end engineer at Netflix, you might say, AI is a way to sell more ads. And what I'm here to tell you is that AI is the replication of the human mental muscle. I don't mean that in a medical sense. I don't mean that as in a 100% this is exactly how it functions. But operationally and functionally and practically, it is able to take over functions which previously required the exercise of the human brain. And when you can do that with robotics on the one hand, i.e., replicate and improve on the output of the human muscle, and at the same time now equate or exceed the capacity of the human mental muscle, then we are at a crossroads. We are at a point of potentially exponential change in the world, and change that is very, very difficult for people outside the field, for people who are not engineers in this area, to truly fathom. And guess who are not engineers in this area? And guess who are people not deeply steeped in this field? All our politicians, all our leaders, all our regulators, almost every member of Congress. And therefore, everything that you see coming from them, even though I'm sure they've got their one-page summary from some number of advisors that have, by committee agreement, given them the talking points, the coherence of the actual proposal is lacking fundamentally. So I think this is a good time to talk about all these things in the context of our United States and in the context, of course, of Pakistan and developing countries.
Terrific. That's a refreshing summary in the era of so much AI-related gibberish in this town. I wanted to ask if you could help us think just over the horizon, right? There are, if you think sort of in phases or in waves, where are we first likely to see AI making a significant impact? I mean, you mentioned we see it in our Netflix algorithms and so forth, but in what sectors do you think are we likely to see this be impactful first? And then maybe just map out for us 2 or 3 waves of how you think this will become impactful in significantly changing how companies across different sectors are operating.
So, frameworks are useful when the use cases are so large that you can't talk about all the use cases, so you kind of bundle things up in categories, and then by analogy, you can do more with that. So maybe there's 2 frameworks that kind of fit together here. One thing that's important to understand is that broadly, the AI that's being talked about these days is discriminative and generative. Discriminative AI is the kind of AI that is trained to discriminate or identify elements of a class from elements of other classes. So as an example, find the dog and not the cat. Find the tank hiding in the fields of Ukraine and not anything else. In other words, I'll train you with examples of these images, supervised learning, and you will discriminate. So that is a form of perception. Now, with generative AI, you are not providing an input to discriminate, but rather you are providing a huge set of examples of almost every type of text and object that might be on the internet. And then you're saying, can you create something that looks like this? Now, there's a little bit more science in how you tie the description of a thing with the picture of a thing. But let's separate that out for a moment. The point there is, one is generative, one is creative, one can create from scratch, one can take descriptions in some other form, like text, and create for you a picture. And the first is discriminative, which is that it identifies differences between classes of objects. So if you think about it in those ways, then many applications kind of fall into those buckets. So in order to drive, let's say, a car autonomously, you have to discriminate. You have to look at the video of a road, and you have to discriminate the individuals crossing, a zebra crossing. You have to look at the lights. You have to look at the stop sign. You have to look at the status of the light. You have to look at the curvature of the road. You compute the angle of the road. But these are all objects that are there that you are discriminating amongst. When you talk to ChatGPT and it produces texts that don't previously exist, that might be influenced by the distribution of texts that it has been given access to, but that unique sequence of letters and words has never existed in the history of man previously. That is generative. It's the creation of something new. Now, the interesting thing, of course, is that we've been introduced to generative AI only in the context, or so far, in the context of characters or syllables or words as sequences, or as they're called, tokens. So what does ChatGPT do? ChatGPT has been trained on a huge corpus, a huge collection of documents, and it essentially predicts not just the next word, guess missing words. Sometimes the missing word is the next word, but with this technique, you also get broader context between just the next word and the last word. You get more context, so you can create semantic continuity. But this is not something that is limited just to text, because it turns out everything is a sequence. Pixels are a sequence. Little dabs of color that come together to create a picture are a sequence. Characters rolled together are a sequence. Actions taken by a human being to get from one end of the room to another end of the room are a sequence. And they're a sequence at multiple levels in terms of the motor controls that are going to activate the muscles in a certain way, or at a macro level in terms of turn right, take one step forward, put your left leg forward, etc. So the question, of course, is how much of this human world is just sequences? And when you think about that, and you realize that these transformers and this generative AI is showing amazing capability when it comes to sequences, you move far beyond the domain of perception, i.e. discrimination, and you move into the domain of action. And in the middle, you have the domain of decision. Perception, decision, action, and you have essentially autonomous ability. Now, there's a lot of debate about, well, how do we make the best decision? How do we make the most aligned decision, aligned with our interests, aligned with the goal of this thing? How do we make the decision based on a true understanding of what the system thinks? Because many neural networks are black boxes. So I wanted to give you that framework because this is sort of the equivalent of talking about the method of fishing as opposed to just finding a fish. But now let's move to a few specific fishes, a few specific examples. If you look at the rate at which the marketing profession, the content generation profession, has moved to ChatGPT, you can just tell. Go to LinkedIn, and you will tell that there's text, the last paragraph of which, and in summary, and there's a whole bunch of emojis in the middle. You can tell it's GPT. So, and this is kind of lazy GPT, right? Because you can use GPT as a valid tool, but then you got to clean it up. You got to make sure that the intent is preserved the way you want. It's a wonderful tool. But lazy GPT is where instantly any user can identify that, and that's happening a lot. So first thing that's already happening is in content creation, these types of systems are showing up. Now, that's not just on LinkedIn. It's also happening with schools. Assignments are being done with GPT. There's a very well-known table that shows how well GPT-4 does on the LSATs and ACTs and all these standardized tests across multiple subjects. And the reality is that even today, GPT, even in conversational terms, is smarter than probably 70 to 75% of the human beings you know in real life, depending on who you hang out with. And I found that to be quite accurate, right? The depth of the conversation you can conduct with a system like this, now particularly with an audio interface, it is truly a back and forth that leads to real insights and real discovery and real value on the part of you, the human. So all of this is this happening now, and yes, academics, yes, copywriting, but then also some Nefarious things like cyber attacks, because when you write commands on the command line to scan a system, to identify the open ports on a system, to then run custom attacks related to those ports on a system. In other words, the process of running a cyber attack as a human being would carry that out. That too is a sequence. So in your mind, if you walk away from this part of the discussion today, what I really want you to do is to think about what all is a sequence. How much of my day is just a sequence? And everything that is a sequence is something that's learnable by a transformer. So that's the macro thought. And then at a micro level, most certainly, writing a document is clearly a generation of tokens that are part of a sequence. Launching a cyber attack is most certainly writing a series of tokens in response to inputs in the middle. Driving a car, control is most definitely a series of sequences. So Max Tegmark wrote something a while back where he said, why is it that neural networks can do such a great job of learning? In other words, the functions that a neural network learns, the curves in many dimensions that a neural network learns, why is it that they're so good at learning reality? And he found, being a physicist, he found that much of reality, the way the universe has evolved, many of the physical things that happen are all characterized by a certain class of function. And it so happens that neural networks are really good at modeling that particular class of function that happens to be everywhere in the universe. So the article, I think, was called "On the Unreasonable Effectiveness of Neural Networks." I think in a similar way, the analogy here is the unreasonable universality of a sequence-based approach to most human actions. That is something that is worth thinking about. And when you think about it in those terms, the light goes on and you say, aha, this is not really about AI making me my burger at McDonald's, or AI driving a car, or AI flying a autonomous aerial vehicle, or AI not turning the light from red to green until it verifies that I'm wearing a helmet while I'm on a bike. It's not just about facial recognition. It's not just about me walking up to a continental flight, it looking at my face, not needing my passport, letting me through. These aren't the only things. Actually, everything I pretty much do is a sequence. And that is the moment of either existential elation or existential dread. And I cover both of these in my book, The Sentient Machine.
I hope you experienced a little bit of both of those feelings in that description. As a former, for a short while, former programmer and math major, I would like to continue this conversation in this vein for a long time, but I do want to pivot to Pakistan.
Yes, please.
With these new technologies, with these new opportunities to think about bringing these models into a range of sectors, where do you see that Pakistan might have comparative advantages relative to countries like the United States, but also relative to its sort of peers in the developing world? What could those comparative advantages look like from your perspective?
Well, there's two things that I must say. One, it may initially appear to be rhetorical, but it's actually not rhetorical at all. I deeply believe it, and it's something that I think Pakistanis should reflect on very deeply. The ancient Egyptians didn't need the World Bank to build the pyramids. They went out, they used their hands, they dug up some soil, they mixed some dried up wheat stalk, and they started forming bricks in wooden squares. They baked them in the sun, and then they picked them up one by one, moved them, and built the greatest buildings known to man, that were the greatest buildings for millennia. There was no IMF loan, there was no Exim negotiation, there was just sheer human will.
No environmental impact study, probably?
Yeah, probably not needed either. But because it was all organic. So, but my point there is that if you take that kind of an approach, which is to say, I have to do a thing, and by God, I will do that thing. Then what you do is you operate in a constraint-based environment. You know, within mathematics, there's this idea of constraint satisfaction problems. You're given a problem which already has numerous constraints around it. You can't do this, you can't look left, you can't look right, one of your hands is tied behind your back, now solve the problem. That is possible to do to the point where there's basically an entire area of science devoted to constraint satisfaction problems. And there are existence proofs throughout man's history. When I talk about Egypt, it's not the only example, of course. So why is it that our villages look the way that they look when we've had technology for 5,000 years that could make them look better and run in a more healthy way, and so on and so forth? So this is a very important point. It's not a rhetorical point. The question here is, how do you get people to get up and do the damn work? How do you do that? Now, that's one part of this. The other part of this is what technology can do. Because look, if you're not going to do anything, then nothing is going to do anything for you, including technology. But now let's come to technology. Pakistan is arguably 230 million people, maybe more, I don't know, somewhere in that ballpark. So there is probably an Australia-sized subset of Pakistan that can walk into the front door of any leading global company and competently execute a job at a top level. If that is the case, why don't we have an Australia-sized economy as a microcosm within Pakistan? Why? So I think this leads to the second issue of resource organization, because people individually can do only so much. Resources need to be organized. This is where Peter Drucker and many of the economics theorists, microeconomists come in. They say, okay, how do you organize these things? How do you fund something, and so on and so forth? We leave that aside because in micro cases that's actually solvable, and I'll tell you a story specifically on that topic. And then we come to the third piece, which is with what? What can you do with technology? That's what everybody wants to learn. And everybody wants to hear that artificial intelligence will come in and just magically you'll snap your fingers and everything's going to be done and the world will change. But for now, men and women must change the world. Maybe for the last time, and hopefully after that the machines will, but this last time, we do have to change the world ourselves. So the applications of technology in Pakistan are so vast. Look, what are Pakistan's problems? Financially, we've got a $30–40 billion deficit in terms of our current account deficit. We've just got to export $30 billion worth of stuff. And failing that, we've got to replace some of the stupid things we import from abroad and just build those locally. Both of those things are entirely possible. I had a wonderful discussion with one of our officials yesterday. And what I said to him was that, look, I know of people that are trying to build things locally in Pakistan that would implement substitution of imports. The challenge, of course, is that every single machine, every single device that they need to import in order to build those things that will replace imports, they get stuck at customs. So there are a few things like that that we've got to sort out. The government doesn't have to actively help. The government just doesn't have to be the land of Mordor. That's all. We don't need the government to be the white knight on a horse that comes to rescue us. That's a bridge too far. We just don't want the orcs in the way every time something good is about to happen. That's it. And if they can manage that, then I think there's a lot of chance for a lot of progress. For example, what do I mean by this? I mean, again, just to contextualize it, look, if you're an entrepreneur and you say, okay, I'm going to go do this and I'm going to be able to deliver export products, and I'll solve the government's, or in part, solve the government's issue of not having enough dollars. And then you tell that guy, okay, you came up with the plan, you seem like a smart guy, you've done this before, you need these 5 machines to get going, but you know what, they're just stuck, and you're not going to get them. And you can do any level of explanation and any level, and there's just this sort of callous response. That's what I mean by getting in the way. We have to acknowledge this, because when you go to a department and you start talking to them, they'll tell you that, oh, you know, our performance, look at this report, our performance was so excellent. I'm not talking about the report. I'm talking about the 5 things that you've got stuck behind that wall right now that you won't release. That's what I'm talking about. So there's that tactical level which needs to be addressed. The other part, and I'll shift this from the government to the private sector. The problem is, so I mentioned to you I went to HSN College. Now, for those of you who know HSN College, I don't need to say much. For those who don't, HSN College is where the rich sport boys go to study and get to know each other. So, so when I was in Pakistan in March and April, I met with my dear friends, these now grown-up rich sport boys, including myself, and we sat down and we had dinner. And all of them are doing very well. They're all highly successful. They're very, very intelligent. I love them to death. They're like my brothers. And so we started a conversation, and one of them said, oh, you know, these days things are so bad. And I said, what's so bad? And he was like, well, you know, you can't do this, you can't do that, you know, the dollars here and the rupees there. I said, listen, all of you guys, there was like 7 or 8 of us. I said, all of you guys are so smart. You're so brilliant. You're so blessed. You've had money in your family for 3, 4, 5 generations. You've never known what it is like to be without money. I guarantee you, you will all die with money in the bank. All of you will die with money in the bank. What is the problem? Why are you not applying capital to things that make a difference in this country? Why are you complaining about the rate at which a plot in defense is increased in value? That's useless. Useless people do that. Useless people buy plots in defense and wait 4 years for the thing to go up. You've added 0 value. You're absolutely, utterly useless if you do that. Why would you do this?
You sound like a fun friend.
They still love me. I have a lovable side. But the reality is, it's true. It's true. What are you going to do? You're going to take your money and buy up some land that no one can use and sit on it for 6 years and then sell it. What is that? Why not apply that money to actually do something, to actually build something, take a risk? The issue here is risk-adjusted return. And what I'm saying is not just do a good deed. I'm saying do the risk-adjusted return calculation, because you might double your money in rupees in an otherwise depreciating currency over 2 or 3 years. But if you do an export business on a risk-adjusted return basis, you can do a lot more. It actually makes economic sense. So now the question is, what are you going to do? And with technology today, you know, the government sort of has taken this view that, you know, we're going to buy $250 million worth of laptops from US manufacturers, paint them yellow like those taxi cabs, distribute them to people, and then within a week have them sold at Hafiz Center in Lahore, and that's how we're going to use $250 million. Many of my friends in that domain, in that department, I've advised over and over again that if you were to just take these $250 million and start Pakistan's first sovereign fund in partnership with US venture capital, and maybe now some Chinese venture capital, and just say the following: look, we want to be significant LPs in your fund, size the fund, put in, let's say, 50 across 5 funds, you're a significant LP. We ask only one thing. We will send each one of you, in which we are a significant LP, 10 of our best companies to present to you every year. If they meet your criteria, please admit them to your portfolio. If they don't meet your criteria, give them some feedback and put them on a plane back to Pakistan. That's it. That's all we ask. And if you look at the first time I officially met with somebody that was about to take this job was more than 10 years ago, 12 years, maybe even more ago when I first said this. If you model out what that $250 million that went into laptops would be worth today, and how many companies, 50 a year, would have gone through this process of integrating within an international technological ecosystem, of learning, of hiring people, of those people going out and launching companies, because that's how tech works. It would change the game, absolutely change the game. Now you need credibility. There are many Pakistanis here that have the credibility, that have built companies. And I think that's the other part, which is we've got to also be real. You know, these are not political appointments, nor should they be. If you're going to have somebody negotiate with a venture fund, the person should have done the thing before. You shouldn't just be somebody liked by a random politician. And if you want to have somebody run a local venture fund, what companies have you built? Show me the companies that you've successfully built. Because you've got to, if you want performance, you've got to be real about the thing, right? You're not going to ask the world's best chef to come and fix your plumbing. He's a great chef, but he's not a good plumber. So why would you take somebody that is an expert at being the best friend of every politician, but has never built a very large global company, and say, you will now run the thing? How? Based on what? So I think technology, again, with artificial intelligence, you can do a tremendous amount of things. We are actually trying to do LLM construction in Pakistan, really large language models in Pakistan with customized data sets. I'm involved with a company that is at the cutting edge of logistics, which I've personally funded. They're using artificial intelligence to optimize the loads in a less than full load vehicle as it's going around the country. So that saves CO2 emissions, it increases revenue, it delivers more goods more quickly. That's a use of AI in a very practical way. We've applied AI to firms like Nestle in Pakistan, helping them deal with quality and safety. There's a company called CHM, which is a German chemical giant. They have a facility in Lahore, actually. They have a factory in Lahore. We've implemented visual AI systems there. So we're doing all of this. At KMLG, which is one of the largest cement producers in Pakistan, we've implemented AI technology that can learn from their machinery and then optimize the usage of electricity. Look, you can save electricity with AI. You can improve security with AI. You can do smart cities with AI. You can go in and plug into the current camera system and look for everything from health events to security events. You can put these things at the intersections of an airport, and in the US, we have this near pandemic of collisions between aircrafts on the ground vehicles impacting. You can solve those problems with vision. The applications are so numerous, it's impossible in a place like this to list them. I'm giving you 6 things that we ourselves are doing in Pakistan. And if you look at globally, we've got 160,000 cameras installed across 16 countries. We've got 3 billion barrels of oil shipped using AI logistics software over the last 3 years. With our partnership with Boeing, we have 120,000 users using AI-based drone control software. So the possibilities are endless. I think what Pakistan can do is to do the opposite of what the advanced countries in the West are doing in terms of regulation and in terms of openness. But we'll come to that, I think, here in a follow-on question.
Yeah. So let me ask sort of one more question, which I think tees up our next panel as well on the geopolitics of this, which is if you look at the global technology landscape, I think there's some concern that it's becoming bimodal, right? You have the United States and the EU and its partners, and increasingly India, developing one sort of family of technology stacks, and then you have China, maybe Russia, and others developing another set of technology stacks and platforms and enabling environments. And I think, looking at Pakistan from the United States, one concern from here might be, well, what if Pakistan's on the wrong side of that fence, on the wrong side from the kinds of technologies that the U.S. and its partners are developing. So you see both sides in much more granular detail. What would you say to that?
Well, the first thing I would say is that I disagree that there are just two giants fighting this out, the US and China, and nobody else matters. I don't think that's the case. I think in many specific domains, there are countries that have shown tremendous progress and tremendous domestic progress. One of the countries that I'm very in awe of in terms of how much they've achieved in such a short period of time is Turkey. Now, they haven't done this broadly across every sector, but they've been building cars for a long time. They've been exporting a lot to Europe, so they had a very good mechatronics and mechanical engineering industry. They've built on that, and now they've become one of the world's largest drone exporters. But these are not dumb drones. They also have a whole collection of companies, Aselsan, Rocketsan, Havelsan, TAI, STM, you name it. There's a whole collection of companies around somebody like Baker that is supplying sensors and optics and communication systems and weapon systems that's making this an ecosystem. And now they run this amazing festival called Technofest, where they get university students and students of really from all classes coming in and getting excited about computing and aviation and so on. That is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger by the year. So I would say that Turkey actually has a lot of domestic technology. In fact, Pakistan has been collaborating very deeply with the Turks on a lot of that domestic technology. Yes, China is most definitely one power center in certain other areas which are low tech. But even a country like Iran has shown that it's possible to do something. You don't have to build an F-22. Not everybody has the need to build an F-22. But within certain constraints, again, going back to that constraint satisfaction problem, you can solve problems within certain constraints. So the issue is it really a bipolar world or is it not? So one is there are emerging centers of alternate technology that are coming up. The second point is that there are open standards, and this might be even more important. So let's take processors, which run the world. And all of this discussion around the US-China chip war has been around preventing China from building advanced chips, preventing access to GPUs, and so on and so forth. Well, now there's an open source architecture called RISC-V. It's neither ARM, it's neither Intel, it's neither Power. It's an open source architecture. So anybody can take that RISC-V architecture and start to build custom chips on top of that. It's early days, but there are a large number of startup companies. And interestingly, Pakistan has adopted RISC-V as its national compute core. This is very, very important. What Pakistan is saying is neither you, neither them. What we're going to do is we're going to build up the capability within VHDL, within very large-scale integration, VLSI, and we're going to start to add on top of this open source design things that we need. And my guess is it's going to start in the defense sector, but once you have those skills, you have those skills, right? Those people go on and launch other companies, they do other things. So RISC-V on the compute side, huge deal. Then there are AI training frameworks, which are now mostly open source, models that are open source. There are even network backends that are becoming increasingly open source. So the amount of information out there that allows somebody to create a program that's entirely domestic is definitely there. I agree that the latest, hottest 2-nanometer process that might come out of TSMC with a really advanced core architecture is not going to do what RISC-V will do, but the question is for what? Those types of processors are necessary for a certain small number of tasks, not for every task. We can build Pakistan up into the world's first cognitive agricultural environment. with just RISC-V. We can build Pakistan up into the world's most advanced smart city platform with just RISC-V. We can do a lot of this totally domestically. We don't need 2 nanometer TSMC chips to achieve all of this. You can take the industry of Pakistan, you can put in systems that start saving 20, 30% electricity with these types of 8, 10, 12, 15-year-old chip technologies. Just add labor, which is a huge advantage that Pakistan has. Pakistan has the following advantages. Like I said, a big population, not all of whom are useful for this pursuit, but maybe an Australia-sized population is pretty useful for this pursuit. Number 2, very deep relationships with Turkey and China, and I would say there is no other country that has equally deep relationships with both Turkey and China and actual operational programs. So yes, great relationships with the US, decent relationships with Russia, great relationship with China, great relationship with Turkey. So actually, Pakistan can get a lot of technology. And right now, Pakistan has been entered into the Chinese moon base project by China. And there are Pakistani scientists now working in China to do that. So it's a question of what all can we learn, what all can we bring in. And the answer is a lot. And you don't need the most advanced version of everything in order to make massive change to the country and to multiply the GDP many-fold. You don't need the 2 nano, even if, assuming that those weren't accessible to Pakistan, which they are today. But even outside of that, there's things to do. But in order to do all of this, you need to get into specificity, and you need to have the drive to do things. And like those rich friends of mine, you need to sort of make your minds to invest the capital. And that, to me, is my goal and my mission for the next many years, which is to encourage Pakistani entrepreneurs not to do boring things, but to do interesting things for a change.
This was an inspiring and provocative discussion. I wish it was part 1 of 7 that we could have today to unspool these ideas on the technology, on Pakistan's comparative place in an evolving global tech ecosystem, and on some of the specific applications, which are fascinating. But we have other great topics to get to, so if you would join me in thanking our speaker this morning, then we'll take a break.